Time. It's the one resource that you're spending for every second that the clock ticks. How are you spending your time? Are you spending it like a consumer, or are you spending it like an investor? As we age and gain experience through time, some of us have gone on to become amazing artists, engineers, and speakers. And some of us have dedicated our entire lives to becoming great, world-class even, at one thing. And what about you? What would you do if you knew that you had within you the ability to master the one skill that would allow you to master them all? What if you became so skilled at learning other skills, which then gave you this unfair advantage in acquiring skills in a fraction of the time? What if you could learn to cook a gourmet dish in less than 24 hours with zero cooking experience? What if you could be the best in your town at basketball from just a weekend of practice? Or what if you could learn a completely new language and hold a fluent conversation with a native speaker from just a week of practice? Now, we all know that there are no hacks or shortcuts to the hard work needed to become one of the best in the world. Now, if it's enough for you to just be really, really good at something, so good that it makes you stand out far from the average, then you might be surprised with how fast you can get there by just practicing smart. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive in exploring a powerful learning framework that allowed a man with no martial arts experience to becoming a national Chinese kickboxing champion. He's also the first American to hold a Guinness World Record in Tango in just 6 months and even become a horseback archer. He's also a very successful angel investor in some of the most innovative companies in the world, like Uber, Facebook, Twitter, and Alibaba. He's the man that can learn a new language in as little as a few weeks and has learned to speak over a dozen languages already. That man is often referred to as the human experiment, Tim Ferriss, who spent a good chunk of his life studying and publishing books on meta-learning. So we're going to dive right in and look at a learning framework developed by Tim to get really good at a new skill as quickly as possible. That framework is the DISSS framework. Not that kind of DISS, but DISSS with an extra S. In his book, The 4-Hour Chef, Tim breaks down this DISSS framework into 4 components: deconstruction, selection, sequencing, and stakes. You ever see those tech commercials where maybe there's like a laptop or a phone and they open it up showing you all the little pieces inside that make it tick? That kind of reminds me of an orchestra, where in an orchestra you have a bunch of different instruments and groups playing together to produce this amazing music that you hear together as a whole. I think of skills as kind of like an orchestra that's composed of smaller sub-skills, or as we'll call it, learnable units. For example, if you want to learn how to cook, then you'll probably need to learn how to chop stuff up like vegetables or meats. And you'll also probably want to learn how to season your food, and maybe even work on presenting your dishes. And I'm sure there's many more learnable units just like those for cooking. That's why before you go headfirst in wrestling to dominate a skill, it's important to deconstruct that skill into as many small learnable units as possible, breaking everything down into its smallest components, and you'll know all the things that you'll need to get good at to master the skill. When you deconstruct a skill, you're essentially creating the blueprint of the skill, and that's the start of the DISSS framework. Once you've broken down a skill into as many learnable units as you can think of, the next thing that you'll want to consider is, how good do you really want to get? If you want to completely master the skill, become world-class even, then you'll need to learn and master every single learnable unit that you just listed here. And learning all that would take you significantly longer than, say, if you just wanted to be really, really good at that skill. Maybe not world-class, but good enough to be the best in your town. This is selection and the first S in our DISSS framework. If it's the latter that you care about, then you can do that in a fraction of the amount of time, because you only need to focus on the 20% of learnable units that account for roughly 80% of the results that you want to achieve in this pool that you just created. This is called the Pareto principle. In other words, there are only a few things that you really need to master, which are going to be the most important in being great at that skill. So you're going to want to focus on those few. Let's look at an example. If you were trying to master a new language, like learning Spanish, there are only a few phrases and words that show up the most in modern conversations. And if you learn those phrases and words, then you can hold down a fluent conversation with any Spanish speaker. This is the same strategy that a gentleman by the name of Cardinal Giuseppe Caspar Mezzofanti purportedly learned over 72 languages in the 1800s. How did he do it? He used the Lord's Prayer. In a few paragraphs, he had native speakers translate the Lord's Prayer in their native language, and from those translations contained the most common words, sentences, grammatical structures that he needed to learn in order to hold a fluent conversation in that language. Tim Ferriss also uses a similar strategy where he translates 12 sentences that teaches him all he needs to know about the language, from where he can just fill in the blanks when he's holding a native conversation. And you really don't need to memorize everything in the dictionary to be fluent in a language. I think it's been reported somewhere that you only need to know about 2,000 words. And if you think about it, even in the English language, there are so many fancy intellectual words in the dictionary like flamboyant that people just don't use every day talking to one another. Once you've broken down the skill and filtered out the 20% to focus on what's most important, the next thing that we'll have to do is figure out what order to learn these learnable units. Ordering is very important because learning skill A before B might make learning skill B a lot easier. This is sequencing in the DISSS framework, where we organize based on priority. Let's look at an example. If you're learning to draw, you're probably going to want to learn how to draw strokes and figures before you learn to draw shadows and textures. Because in order to give texture and shadow to things, you need objects and figures that can cast them. Here's another example of this concept in a clip where Josh Waitzkin, who is a former chess grandmaster, teaches Tim how to play chess.
Josh is very effective as a learner and as a teacher, in part because he's willing to be contrarian. So as opposed to starting with, say, openers for chess, which you would expect, that's what almost everyone does, he'll start with the end game. He'll start with where you want to go, so that you're learning principles that can be applied anywhere, and that makes you very adaptable, and it makes you very formidable. That can also be translated to jiu-jitsu, it can be applied to anything.
Here, Josh explains how most people learn chess by studying and memorizing the openings first. He teaches Tim the opposite, where learning how to checkmate the other person's king is most important because that allows you to win the game. And by starting at the end first, in chess, you focus more on learning the strategies and skills on the board, like positioning and setting up traps and things like that. So far, we've outlined the framework to give you a plan for learning a new skill. But just because you come up with a plan doesn't mean you're going to follow it. So the last ingredient in the DISSS framework is stakes. Not steak, stakes. You've got to have some skin in the game and a slap on the wrist if you get lazy or things go south. We're talking accountability here. There is a number of things that you can do to set up an accountability system for yourself. If you know someone who has your back, you can ask them to be an accountability partner and have them check up on you every week to see if you're progressing on your goals. And if you're half-assing things, then you're going to feel like a jackass. Another option is to use a site like stick.com, which I'm not affiliated with, where you pretty much bet on yourself to succeed. You put up money saying if you don't achieve some goal by a certain date, then that money gets sent to an anti-charity of your choice. If you don't know what an anti-charity is, it's basically a charity that you would hate to donate to. The idea is it will motivate you even more knowing that if you don't hit your mark, not only are you losing money, but you're also losing it to a charity that you absolutely hate. This idea takes advantage of a concept in cognitive psychology called loss aversion that refers to people's tendency to prefer avoiding losses to acquiring equal gains. In other words, most people feel like it's better to not lose $5 than to win $5. And stick.com takes advantage of this concept to motivate you using the fear of losing the money you're betting on yourself if you fail. This is the DISSS framework, which is a simple yet powerful tool that you can use to acquire and get really good at a new skill, starting with deconstructing the skill into small, learnable units, then selecting the 20% that will have the biggest impact, which you can then prioritize to learn the most important things first, and finally, setting up some sort of an accountability system to light a fire under your ass and keep you motivated to stick to the system. Now that you know the DISSS framework, what's a new skill that you want to acquire? Let me know in the comments below, as well as any ideas for stuff that you want to see on this channel. And if you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe with notifications, and I'll see you on the next one.